This is a story older than 3,000 years. A story of a man who became immortal, not by the will of the gods, but through the persistence of memory. His name was Achilles. You will hear why his mother tried to make him invulnerable and why she failed. How the future hero once hid from war in a woman's dress and who unmasked him. Why he turned away from battle and what brought him back burning with rage. You will follow his duel with Hector and discover why even victory could not soothe his heart. You will see who guided the arrow that ended his life and what became of him after death. This is no simple biography, it is a legend. And within that legend hides something strikingly human. The fear of choice, the fear of loss, the fear of being forgotten. So settle yourself, let your mind rest as the night deepens, and let us begin not from the war itself, nor even from the birth of the boy, but from a prophecy. A whisper of fate that made even the proudest gods retreat. Suggest in the comments topics for new stories and subscribe to the channel. New bedtime stories come out here every day. Now let us return to the beginning. The tale of Achilles begins not with the clash of armies, but with his mother, Thetis. She was a sea goddess, one of the Nereids, daughter of the ancient Nereus and the Oceanid Doris. Like her sisters, she lived in the depths of the sea, where silence reigns, where primordial power moves unseen, and where cold eternal currents drift. Yet she was unlike the rest. Her beauty and majesty were such that even the greatest of the Olympians burned with desire for her. They say both Zeus and Poseidon sought her love, each in their own way. But fate intervened. An oracle, by some accounts, Prometheus, by others, the goddess of justice, Themis, uttered words that changed everything. The son of Thetis will be stronger than his father. He will surpass him in strength, in glory, and perhaps one day he will rise against him. For a mortal, this might have been a blessing. For the immortals, it was a threat. Zeus heard the prophecy and stepped back. Poseidon retreated in silence. None of them wished for Thetis to bear a child who could grow greater than his sire, one who might shake the balance of Olympus itself. So the gods resolved to bind her to a mortal, to tie her womb to human fate, to mortal blood, so that her son would never ascend into their ranks. Thus began a chain of events that none could halt. Thetis resisted. She did not wish to marry a man of flesh and bone. She hid, she transformed, she fled. She became water, then fire, then a wild beast, a snake, a bird. But the man chosen for her was not ordinary. His name was Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, descendant of Aeacus, grandson of mighty Zeus himself. He had fought alongside Heracles, had joined the Caledonian hunt, and had won renown for courage and for honour. In him burned both human strength and divine legacy. He was no common suitor. The story of Achilles was already taking root, and the gods were watching. There are many versions of how Peleus won Thetis as his bride. Some say he simply saw her upon the shore, fell in love at first sight, and with the aid of wise Chiron the centaur pursued her until her endless transformation ceased. She became fire, water, beasts of the wild, and he held her through each change, until at last she yielded. Others whisper that the gods themselves guided the moment, ensuring that their design would unfold without resistance. However it happened, the wedding was held. And it was not merely a wedding, but a feast of worlds. Every great power of the age gathered beneath its canopy. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Demeter. The old titans came, the spirits of nature, nymphs, satyrs, dryads, even the Moirai, the silent weavers of destiny. It was a union meant to bridge heaven and earth, to reconcile divine will with human fate. The gifts poured forth like a river. Athena bestowed a shield, hammered from drops of morning dew. Hephaestus forged a diadem, radiant as the sun. Apollo lifted the lyre, and his music filled the hall with golden light. Artemis scattered blossoms across the bridal bed. The celebration was meant to be whole, perfect, divine. But perfection never lasts. There was one they had not invited, Eris, the goddess of discord. Perhaps they had forgotten her, or perhaps they feared her shadow and believed absence would keep her away. They were wrong. She entered unannounced. No one dared stop her. She did not scream, she did not curse, she did not strike. She walked to the table, drew from mist a golden apple, and cast it into the centre. Upon it, a single inscription, "To the fairest." Silence fell. Hera's hand stretched forward. Athena's eyes fixed upon it. Aphrodite's smile curled. Each claimed the gift. Each believed without doubt that she alone deserved it. And so the marriage feast became the seed of war. Zeus, seeing that the quarrel would not fade, refused to judge between them. Instead, he chose another, a mortal, a shepherd who was also a prince of Troy. His name was Paris. He would one day steal Helen. He would one day ignite the fire of Troy. But here, he was summoned to decide. Hera promised him dominion over all lands. Athena offered wisdom and victory. Aphrodite whispered a sweeter temptation, the love of the most beautiful woman alive. And Paris chose love. That choice, simple in the moment, would fracture the world. That apple would one day split kingdoms. That promise would draw armies to the walls of Troy. But that day had not yet come. The feast still lingered, the apple still gleamed, and the first cracks of discord were only beginning to spread across the marble of Olympus and the hearts of men. After the wedding, Thetis left the sea behind and journeyed to Phthia in the northern lands of Greece. There she dwelled with Peleus, her mortal husband. Theirs was not a union of passion, but it bore the blessing of gods. Within the halls of Peleus, between the realm of men and the whispers of the ocean, she conceived a child. No myth tells us how her pregnancy unfolded. The stories fall silent on that part, as though the world itself held its breath. Only one thing is certain. Olympus watched. Every immortal strained toward the horizon of her womb, knowing the boy would be more than a son. He would be the continuation of a prophecy, the answer to the gods' fear. He was awaited and he was dreaded. And when he was born, even before he drew his first breath, destiny was already waiting at his side. And at last, he was born. A child with hair like sunlight, strong as a young lion, son of a goddess and a mortal king. They named him Achilles. When he first drew breath, his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, did not rejoice as mortal mothers do. She did not cradle him with unknowing wonder. She looked upon him with eyes that had already seen his end. The prophecy had not left her mind. Her son would be great, surpass his father in strength, but he might die too soon. Thetis, who had known centuries untouched by age or pain, could not endure the thought of a child destined for mortality. She vowed, death is not for him. The myths diverge here. Some tell of a descent into the underworld. Thetis, holding the infant in her arms, carried him to the threshold of Tartarus, to the black waters of the Styx. That river was no ordinary current. Its waters burned like iron, scalded like fire, and yet to those who survived its touch, they granted terrible power. Grasping Achilles by his heel, Thetis lowered him into the river. His skin turned unyielding. No sword could pierce it. No arrow could draw blood. Yet the place where her fingers held him remained untouched, dry, vulnerable. From this tale came the phrase, Achilles' heel, a hidden weakness even in the strongest of beings. But there is another version, older, harsher. In this telling, Thetis did not go to the Styx. Instead, each night she anointed the boy's body with ambrosia, the food of the gods, and then held him over the flames. The fire devoured all that was mortal, searing away frailty, forging resilience in silence. She was not a mother then, but a force of nature, shaping her son into something beyond human. By night Achilles cried in pain. By day she began again. Until one evening Peleus walked into the chamber. He saw his wife holding their child above the fire, saw the skin glowing, the infant screaming, and in horror he shouted. To him it was not preservation, but destruction. Thetis looked at him once, said nothing, and vanished. She returned to the sea from which she had come. Peleus never saw her again. She left not because she lacked love, but because she could no longer save him. Achilles remained, nearly invulnerable, nearly immortal, and completely alone. Peleus was a brave warrior and a just king, but he was not divine. He felt in his heart that his son was too great for the palace walls, too swift for an ordinary life. And so he did what the fathers of heroes often did. He entrusted the boy to the wisest of all mentors, the centaur Chiron. High upon Mount Pelion he dwelled, unlike his kind. While other centaurs feasted, drank, and roamed the wilds, Chiron lived in solitude. He studied the stars, he mastered the lyre. He knew the secrets of medicine, of healing herbs, of the hunt, of prophecy itself. He had raised many before, Jason, Asclepius, Orpheus, and now the child of prophecy, Achilles. The boy's fate was no longer solely in his mother's hands. It was in the care of a teacher who shaped not only warriors, but legends. And in the shadows of Pelion, the greatest legend of all began to take form. In the cave of Chiron, life was both harsh and simple. Achilles, still a boy, awoke each day to discipline. At dawn he ran across the mountain slopes until his lungs burned. Then came archery, the pull of the bowstring, the whisper of arrows slicing air. After that, lessons of healing, grinding herbs, binding wounds, cooling fever. Chiron taught him to recognize rare plants, to separate the poisonous from the healing. Achilles learned how to stitch flesh, how to stanch blood, how to draw life back from the edge of death. Yet his education was not only in medicine and war. When it was time to eat, the centaur did not call him with shouts, but with melodies. From the cave drifted the sound of the lyre. Achilles took up the instrument and wrote his own songs, notes that carried something of the wind, something of sorrow, something of the glory yet to come. Legends say he was the swiftest of mortals. His feet seemed barely to touch the ground. You were not born to stand still, Chiron told him. And indeed he did not. He darted along trails, leapt over ravines, ran across gravel, grass, puddles, always faster than the rest. He caught hares with his bare hands, outran deer without a spear, crept upon birds like a passing shadow. He was not only strong, he was watchful. He was silent when silence was needed. And Chiron repeated to him, "A true hero knows not only when to strike, but more importantly when to hold his hand." The boy grew into a youth. His shoulders broadened, his voice deepened, his eyes hardened. He already knew he was not like others. He sensed that his life would not follow the pattern of men, Yet for now he still ran the mountain slopes, still practiced the bow, still listened to the stars with his teacher's voice nearby. His body grew firm, his movements precise, his tone confident. He was no longer a child. What Chiron had given him was not simply knowledge, but inheritance, a legacy of wisdom and restraint. And yet, while Achilles hunted in silence, while he trained in healing and song, events far beyond Pelion had already begun to stir. In Olympus, branches of fate were shaking. In Troy, in a city he had not yet heard of, a story was unfolding that would one day draw him in. It began with that golden apple, with Paris of Troy choosing Aphrodite, with her promise fulfilled. The love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, was carried off to Troy. The gods once again took sides. The Greeks prepared for war, and in that moment, destiny turned its gaze back toward Achilles. The prophecy had spoken clearly. The Greeks could not win without him. Only Achilles could tip the scales. Yet there was another condition. If he marched to the walls of Troy, he would not return alive. There could be no victory without sacrifice. There could be no glory without an ending. The first to hear were not the mortal kings, but the gods themselves, and then Thetis. She came once more to Peleus, her voice urgent, demanding, "Save him while there was still time." So they made their choice. Achilles would be hidden, far from oaths, far from the call to arms, far from the chains of glory, a place no one would think to seek him, a sanctuary that was only another disguise for fate. They chose the island of Skyros. There ruled an old king, Lycomedes, a quiet ally, a man who kept silence like a shield. His palace stood high in the mountains, hidden from all eyes. He had many daughters, but no sons. And there, among the daughters, Achilles was meant to vanish, to dress a young warrior as a maiden. Madness. But what is madness compared to the will of fate? So began one of the strangest chapters in the life of the future hero. He was given a woman's name, by some accounts Pyrrha, the flame-haired, for the colour of his locks. They clothed him in soft garments. They wove his hair into braids. He entered Lycomedes' palace as though he were another daughter. At first, everything was wrong. His movements too sharp, his voice too deep. But the girls accepted him, thinking him quiet, unusual, but not a stranger. Slowly he adapted. He joined their tasks, plucked songs on the lyre, danced in their circles, and sometimes stood in silence beneath the rain, gazing at the clouds. Achilles was no coward. He did not hide out of fear. He knew only this: if he joined the war now, death awaited him. And life, despite all that fate promised, was still precious. Yet the longer he remained on Skyros, the more he felt a strange ache. Not only for the weight of weapons, but for himself. His heart longed not to be disguised. His hands yearned for the bowstring, his chest for open breath. His very body resisted submission. And within the palace something occurred that Thetis perhaps had not foreseen. One of Lycomedes' daughters, Didomea, began to watch him with unusual attention. She was drawn to this peculiar maiden with the piercing gaze, and he did not turn her away. The myths do not say exactly how it happened. Perhaps it began with a whispered conversation at night, with the brush of a hand, with a small truth shared. Perhaps it was simply an unspoken recognition that he was not what he appeared to be. In any case, a bond was born. Achilles revealed himself to her not only as a man but as one already marked by doom, and she did not recoil. Months passed, and from that union came a child, a boy named Neoptolemus. Later he would stride across the ashes of Troy, but for now he was only an infant. In him 2 destinies entwined, one hidden, one yet to unfold. Meanwhile, along the shores of Greece an army gathered. Kings and heroes pledged themselves: Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Nestor, Diomedes. The ships swelled in number, but one figure was missing. The seers repeated the truth. Without Achilles, Troy cannot fall. He is the key. He is the ruin. He is the victory. And already the world was moving to drag him from hiding. It was Odysseus, the craftiest of men, who set out to find him. Disguised as a merchant, he sailed to Skyros. He brought crates filled with treasures, jewels, ornaments, silks, polished mirrors, and in one of the boxes, hidden among the trinkets, lay a sword, a spear, and a shield. He entered the hall where the daughters of Lycomedes gathered. The chests were opened. Laughter filled the air as the girls rushed toward the glittering bracelets and shimmering fabrics. They tried on rings, they draped themselves in cloth, they marvelled at their reflections. Only one figure stood apart. Clad in a maiden's dress, she did not reach for gold. Her eyes fixed upon the weapons, Odysseus saw. Then, without warning, he gave the signal. His companions raised a sudden battle cry. The chamber shook with the sound. The girls shrieked in terror, scattering all but one. The disguised figure seized the sword, lifted it high, and stood in a warrior's stance. Thus Achilles was revealed. Odysseus stepped forward. "Achilles, son of Peleus," he said, "the time has come." No one spoke. Not Lycomedes, not his daughters. All watched in silence. Achilles lowered the blade, gazed upon its edge, then raised his eyes to the sky. That night, the myths say, Thetis came to him again. She pleaded. She begged him to remain. She offered him another fate, a bride, a son, a hearth, a long and peaceful old age. He could have been happy, but Achilles had already chosen. "If I stay, the world will forget me," he whispered. "If I go, I will die, but my name will live as long as songs are sung." And so, he chose the path of the hero. At dawn, he departed from Skyros. His steps led toward Aulis, toward the ships, toward the oaths sworn beneath the sky, toward the war that awaited. He no longer hid. His name rang aloud again. Achilles stepped from shadow into legend, and nothing could halt the march of fate. The tale in which Achilles would find immortality did not begin with sword or siege, nor with hatred. It began long before, at a feast, at a wedding where all the gods were invited, except one. The goddess Eris, bearer of discord, was not summoned, for they feared her presence would bring ruin. Yet she came anyway, and without a word she laid a golden apple upon the table, upon it inscribed, "To the fairest." In that instant celebration turned to rivalry. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed the title. None would yield. What began as a quarrel grew into something far greater, a fracture that reached beyond the banquet hall. Zeus, unwilling to judge, commanded that a mortal decide. That mortal was Paris, Prince of Troy. Each goddess offered him a gift. Hera promised dominion over the earth, Athena victory in war and wisdom without equal, Aphrodite love, the love of the most beautiful woman alive. Paris chose Aphrodite, and for his choice he was given Helen, Queen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus. A woman whose beauty was said to rival that of the gods. It was a choice that would set fire to the world. Some say she followed Paris willingly. Others claim she was stolen. But in the end, the truth mattered a little. The Queen of Sparta was in Troy, and the honour of Menelaus was broken. Yet this was more than a personal wound. Before Helen had become a wife, all the great lords of Greece had sworn an oath. If ever her union is violated, we shall unite as one and restore what is just. Norigi. Now that vow called upon them all. Every king, every house, every warrior was bound. So the Greeks began to gather their forces. The port of Aulis was chosen, a harbour open to the east, a perfect place from which to launch a fleet. One by one they came. Odysseus from Ithaca, Nestor from Pylos, Diomedes from Argos, the two Ajaxes from Salamis and Locris, Idomeneus of Crete, and at their head Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, elder brother of Menelaus, commander of the host. Hundreds of ships lined the shore. Thousands of warriors stood armed. And still, one figure was absent. The seer Calchas spoke the prophecy once more. Victory is impossible without Achilles. He must go to Troy or all is lost. And at last, Achilles came. From Skyros to Aulis, he arrived with his Myrmidons, his loyal people, their reputation running ahead of them like fire on the wind. He was young, handsome, resolute. His eyes held no fear. He knew he was going to a war from which he would not return. But he had chosen his path. The host was gathered, but the sea was still. Days passed. The wind did not rise. The sails hung motionless. Murmurs grew among the soldiers. Again Calchas was called, and again prophecy struck. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, was angered. For Agamemnon had once slain her sacred deer, and in his pride boasted he surpassed her in skill. The goddess had not forgiven. Now she demanded a price. The fleet would not move unless a sacrifice was made, not of any beast, not of common blood, but of Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia. The king was torn. As a father he wept. As a general he clenched his jaw. The weight of the oath, the pressure of allies, the pull of destiny, all forced him toward the unthinkable. He deceived her, summoning her to Aulis with the promise of marriage to Achilles. But when the truth was revealed, Iphigenia already stood at the altar. Some say she was slain there, her blood spilled upon the stones. Others whisper that Artemis, pitying her, replaced her with a deer and carried her away to distant lands. Whichever tale is true, the wind rose at last. The sails filled, the fleet moved. The army of Greece crossed into the sea. Their first stop was the island of Tenedos, where they regrouped. Then they landed on the coast of the Troad. Achilles stepped onto the soil of war not with dread, not with triumph, but with a cold and steady resolve. He was not yet the godlike hero the poets would later sing of, but even in those first days his fury marked him apart. He did not fight for plunder, he did not fight for gold. He carried destruction because there was something inside him, an inexorable force that could not be stilled. Before the siege of Troy truly began, Achilles had already laid waste more than 10 cities. Among them was Lyrnessus, where he took captive a woman named Briseis. At the time, it seemed a small episode, a shadow among many battles, but later she would become a pivot in his fate. Among these early encounters, one story stood apart, not for its blood, but for its strange turn. It was the tale of Telephus, king of Mysia. When the Greek fleet first set sail, their path was not direct. By mistake, or perhaps by the hand of destiny, the myths differ. They landed not in Troy, but in Mysia, a little-known land in the north of Asia Minor. The Mysians saw the armed strangers disembark and mistook them for invaders. Perhaps they were right. Their king, Telephus, went out to meet them. He was no ordinary ruler. Son of Heracles, he bore in his veins heroic blood. Young, strong, a seasoned warrior, he would not yield. Battle erupted quickly. The clash was fierce, the dead many. The Greeks believed they had struck the first blow against Troy, but they were wrong. In that battle, Achilles revealed his true power. He met Telephus face to face. Their strikes shook the field. Telephus fought with honour, but the spear of Achilles was swifter. Wounded deeply, the king fell. Only then did the Greeks discover their mistake. These were not Trojans, but their allies. They retreated, leaving Telephus broken on the ground. But the wound Achilles had given him did not close. It burned like venom. No healer, no priest could cure it. In desperation, Telephus went to Delphi and asked the oracle what to do. The answer came in riddled words. He who wounded shall be the one to heal. So the king, still limping, leaning on his spear, came not as an enemy but as a supplicant. He entered the Greek camp and stood before Achilles. "You robbed me of strength," he said. "Now restore it. Without you, I will die." Achilles was astonished, but he did not refuse. He remembered Chiron, who had taught him not only to strike but to mend. By one telling, Achilles scraped shavings from the shaft of his spear and laid them upon the wound. The wood itself, tied to his hand and his destiny, worked as if by enchantment. The wound began to close. Telephus was healed, and in gratitude he swore never again to fight against the Greeks. Later he would guide them through the unknown roads, leading them to the very walls of Troy, where otherwise they might have wandered lost. The warriors looked upon Achilles with new eyes. Even the most celebrated among them sensed that he was different, too young yet already fearsome, silent yet merciless. His name began to drift through the camps like a fire, spoken as a name of strength and a name of danger. Thus his glory was kindled. Thus began the war in which heroes would gain immortality and fall one by one. Years had passed since the Greeks first set foot on the shores of the Troad, and still Troy stood, proud, unbroken, wrapped in walls said to have been built by the hands of gods. Each day the Greeks waited for victory, but the days gave them only more battles, more funerals, more weariness beneath the cries of ravens and the merciless sun. Amid this slow war, Achilles continued to fight. Each strike of his spear became a fragment of legend. He did not seek power, did not sit among the councils of kings, and yet his name was whispered everywhere, by allies in awe, by enemies in fear, by bards who already knew the weight of his story. Among the conquered cities was Lyrnessus, small, fortified, now fallen. There Achilles took a woman named Briseis. She was no queen, but of noble blood, and in her presence there was said to be both dignity and sorrow. Her husband was slain, her city destroyed, and she was left alone. Though he'd come as a conqueror, Achilles treated her with respect. He did not reduce her to a spoil of war, nor turn her into an object. In the camp they whispered. She had become close to him. To some, a concubine. To others, a companion. To Achilles she was a presence beside whom silence no longer felt like loneliness. The Greek host was commanded by Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, brother of Menelaus. Ambitious, proud, powerful, and deeply flawed. His prize from a raid had been Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. But the old priest, Chryses, came to ransom her back. He came with gifts, with pleas. Agamemnon scorned him. The priest turned to his god. Soon plague stalked the Greek camp. Men died quickly, the sickness spreading like fire. Panic grew. Calchas the seer was called. His words carried the edge of doom, until Chryseis returned to her father, The curse will not lift. Agamemnon yielded, but with bitterness. He would give up the girl, but he demanded recompense. If he lost his prize, he would take another, and so he turned to Briseis, not as a matter of strategy, but as an insult. He took her from Achilles, not to strengthen his rule, but to humiliate the man who had carried the army upon his shoulders. It was not simply the theft of a woman. It was a statement, a king showing that in this army, honour belonged only to the throne, and not to the warrior who bled for it. To Achilles it was a wound deeper than any arrow. It was contempt spat upon the very idea of heroism. He who had fought, who had saved them, who had never sought a crown, was cast aside beneath another man's pride. He did not shout. He did not draw his blade. He didn't challenge Agamemnon before the host. He simply rose, left the council, returned to his tent, and withdrew. No more would he fight. No more would his myrmidons take the field. He stripped himself from a war he no longer called his own. In his eyes, the army had ceased to be a fellowship of heroes. It had become a mob, bound to the arrogance of a single man. And so silence fell where once there had been thunder. From that moment, the Greek army stood without its strongest warrior. No one dared say it aloud, but all knew the truth. A shadow had fallen across their ranks. Without Achilles, councils felt hollow, attacks faltered, and the confidence of the host slowly bled away. While he remained in his tent, wrapped in silence, the Trojans moved. At their head marched Hector, son of King Priam. Brave, wise, just, a true protector of his city. With his presence, the Trojans no longer hid behind their walls. They pressed the Greeks back onto the plain step by step. Hector led as one who knew what he fought for, what he was prepared to die for. And with every dawn, the Greeks were driven closer to the sea. Their ships, once drawn proudly high upon the shore, now stood as their final line of defence. In this rising despair, a single name returned again and again. Achilles. But he did not answer. His tent was closed, his spear unmoving. Beside him stayed Patroclus, friend, companion, the only one bold enough to speak when all others remained silent. Patroclus was not as strong as Achilles, but he was steadfast. He saw how bitterness churned in his friend's heart. He saw the fist clenched at the sound of battle horns. He knew this silence was no weakness, but a wound. A wound not carved by an enemy's blade, but by the insult of a comrade. He pleaded with Achilles. He spoke of the comrades falling on the field, of the war tilting toward ruin, of the enemy pressing almost to their very tents. But Achilles did not hear, or perhaps he chose not to. Instead, he sat by the sea, as though waiting for the earth itself to admit his righteousness. And yet each night he listened to the sounds of war. Each day he learned the names of the dead. His anger did not fade, but slowly another fire began to burn, one that consumed not those who wronged him, but himself. In this heavy silence, Patroclus began to feel what could not be delayed. He sensed a burden drawing near, one he did not yet understand, but one that would soon change everything. Meanwhile, Hector's Trojans advanced, relentless. Step by step they neared the Greek ships. What once seemed unthinkable now became reality. The Greeks wavered, their line bent. Their long struggle beneath Troy's walls began to crumble, and in their desperation one name still echoed through the camp, the name of the warrior who refused to rise, who would not forgive the insult cast upon him. Achilles. He remained in his tent. Each evening he watched the horizon in silence, while inside him the storm still seethed. He knew his absence was costing the army dearly, and yet He did not lift his spear. His decision was final. For him, honour stood higher than the cries of the dying. Beside him, in that silence day after day, sat Patroclus, his childhood companion, his shadow, his opposite, and yet a part of him. Patroclus knew Achilles was suffering, though the hero never showed it. He saw how every report of the fallen carved a deeper crack in his friend's silence. Patroclus did not beg. He waited. But when it became clear that without intervention the Trojans would break the Greek lines and set fire to the ships, he entered the tent and finally spoke the words he had long carried within. He did not ask Achilles to forgive the insult. He did not demand that Achilles himself return to the field. He said only this: "If you cannot lift your arms, entrust them to me. Let me wear your armour, rally the Myrmidons, and lead them forth. The enemy will believe you have returned, and they will retreat. I seek no glory, only to hold back death." Achilles sat in silence, eyes fixed on the ground, as if staring into some knot deep within his soul, twisted with pain, bound by pride. He knew Patroclus. He knew this plea was not for fame, but born of loyalty, of inevitability. At last he nodded. He gave him his armour. In that moment it was as though he gave away a fragment of himself. But he warned him, "Drive them from the ships, but no further. Do not approach the walls of Troy. Beyond them lies not battle, but doom." Patroclus donned the bronze that was not his. To those who looked, he became another man. The Myrmidons, long silent, stirred as if awakened from stone. They formed their lines, their spears rising. When the signal sounded, their cry shook the plain like an earthquake. The Greeks, despairing only moments before, heard the roar and felt strength return. The Trojans, seeing the gleaming armour of Achilles, faltered. They believed he had returned, and they drew back. Patroclus, driven by compassion and courage, hurled himself into the fight. He struck with a fury not his own, cutting down foes one after another. The tide shifted. The Greeks breathed victory once more. But victory can be a fire that blinds. In the heat of triumph, Patroclus forgot the boundary he had been forbidden to cross. In his zeal, he pressed on, up to the very walls of Troy. There, before the gates, Hector awaited. Their duel was swift, but fierce. Patroclus fought bravely, but he did not bear the unshakable certainty of Achilles. One stroke, precise, merciless, and the armour fell to the dust. As life left him, Patroclus is said to have whispered, "You have killed me, but soon you will face the one who will avenge me." When word reached the camp that Patroclus was dead, no one dared be the first to speak it to Achilles. He still sat by the sea, alone, unchanged in his vigil. But when the words came, his face remained still. Then, slowly, his head bowed, as if something within him had collapsed. And then he rose. His cry broke the air. They said it carried not only across the Greek camp, but over the walls of Troy itself. His voice, filled with agony and wrath, swept across the plain. And even the gods upon Olympus, so the poets tell, turned their faces to hear. Nothing had been able to draw Achilles back to the fight, until now. He felt as though he had lost not merely a companion, but a piece of himself. Glory no longer mattered. Praise no longer mattered. Only one desire remained, that Patroclus be avenged. But the armour in which Patroclus had fallen was gone. Hector had stripped it from his body as a prize. Achilles was left bare. So he called to his mother. Thetis came once more, not with reproach, not with pleading, but with the silence carried only by mothers who know they will outlive their sons. "I know," Achilles told her. "If I return, I will die. But I am already dead. Thetis rose to Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, and he forged armour unlike any that mortal flesh had ever borne. A shield upon which was carved the whole of existence, from shepherds to stars, from harvest to sunset, from birth to war. A helm that blazed like fire, a breastplate from which iron itself rebounded. Clad in this new bronze, Achilles stood transformed. No longer the boy, no longer the slighted warrior, no longer even the hero. He had become what he was always destined to be, a man with nothing left to lose. He no longer sought fame. He sought only to reclaim his friend, or, if that could not be, to punish the one who had taken him. When Achilles strode back onto the battlefield, the war itself shifted. The ground seemed to beat with a new rhythm. The Greek army straightened, its courage surging as though the very air had thickened around them. Among the Trojans, a fear long held within burst into the open. They saw him coming, alone, unshielded by ranks, walking as though no armour was needed but his fury. He did not argue. He did not bow to command. He did not heed counsel. He simply advanced. And those who stood in his path scarcely had time to understand what struck them down. His spear flew like a thought. His blows landed with unerring precision. Each step felt driven by fate itself. He was not fighting for victory. He was clearing a road that led only to one man, Hector. The Prince of Troy waited by the walls. He knew the meeting was inevitable. He did not run. He did not hide. But within him stirred the weight of doom. This duel was no longer merely a matter of honour. It was a sentence, one that offered no defence. In Troy, voices begged him to stay. Priam, his father, implored him not to face Achilles. His mother Hecuba wept and prayed. But Hector understood. If he sheltered behind the walls, the city would fall before the stones did. And so he walked out to meet the man whose grief had turned to fire, whose rage was deeper than the war itself, whose shadow now stretched across the city. Before the clash began, there were a moment when both men simply stood before one another. Hector, knowing he was stepping into death. Achilles, knowing that death was now the only thing he no longer feared. No shouts, no challenges, no thunderous words, only a gaze exchanged, and in that gaze, everything was already spoken. Hector moved first, darting forward with speed, with skill, but Achilles was faster. The warrior whom Troy had believed invincible for years could not even touch his foe. The gods watched in silence. None intervened. Only Athena, unseen, walked at Achilles' side, steadying his aim, lending strength from his fury. At last Hector realized the truth. He could not win, and so he tried to plead. "If I fall, return my body to my father. Do not deny me burial." But Achilles, his face emptied of all human softness, answered, "As you spared Patroclus, so will I spare you." The spear flew. It struck true. Hector fell like a tree cut down in an open field. He still breathed, his eyes still clear as Achilles approached, but Achilles said nothing. He stripped the armour from Hector's body, leaving only the face uncovered, as though to keep one last reminder of who this had been. Then came the act that chilled even Olympus. Achilles tied Hector's ankles to his chariot. He mounted, gave no pause, and drove across the plain. The body of Troy's greatest defender was dragged through the dust. Stones tearing flesh, clouds of dirt rising behind. Cries rose from Greeks and Trojans alike, one voice of horror, like the earth itself protesting. Around the camp Achilles circled 3 times. Hector's corpse pulled in the wake. He heard no prayers, no curses, no pleas. He stared ahead, as though expecting that at the end of the track in the silence beyond he might see the friend he had lost. But there was no vision. Hector, once the pride of his people, was now a broken shadow, and even his death brought no solace. Achilles stood among the fallen, amid armour and corpses and fire, and he understood. Vengeance was complete, but the void within him remained. Patroclus would not return. His shield, bright with stars, reflected nothing but grief. He had avenged, but he had not healed. The war did not end with Hector's fall. Its breath slowed, but it did not die, and Achilles, returned to battle, carried no hunger for glory, no thirst for victory. He fought because he could not stop. He fought because he had nowhere left to go. And the more he fought, the more his pain fused into his very being. He had become the storm itself, merciless, unceasing. The fame of Achilles grew, but he himself no longer sought song nor triumph. He fought in silence, with the stubborn dignity of a man fulfilling his final duty to life. In each of his movements there was inevitability, as if fate itself guided his limbs. He did not quarrel. He did not listen to speeches. He asked no counsel. The Greeks sang his name, but none dared meet his eyes. And then, upon the Trojan side, a new ally appeared, Memnon, son of the dawn goddess Eos, king of the Ethiopians. Tall, majestic, surrounded by loyal warriors, he entered Troy as both honoured guest and long-awaited saviour. Memnon was not a brash youth. He did not boast of his strength, nor flaunt the name of his divine mother. His dignity was quiet, almost kingly. He did not shout for vengeance, nor seek battle for its own sake. But when Troy suffered, he lifted his spear and marched to the front. Among those struck down by his hand was Antilochus, son of Nestor, a man Achilles respected, a companion bound to him by memories of home and youth. The death of Antilochus opened in Achilles a wound he thought long sealed. It was not revenge, as it had been with Hector. It was something colder, deeper, a reminder that everything he touched seemed to vanish, that all he cherished was destined to be lost. So he challenged Memnon, not in rage, but with the clarity of necessity, and Memnon accepted. He knew this meeting could not be avoided. Their duel was not only a clash of power, but of sorrow. The spears rang, the earth shook, and even the gods, so the stories say, watched in uneasy silence. Memnon fought bravely with honour that gleamed even in blood. Yet Achilles, driven not by fury, but by the hollow within, proved stronger. The king of the Ethiopians fell. Eos, his mother, descended in her light, covering her son with the radiance of dawn. She lifted his body and carried it beyond the edges of the world, leaving the battlefield drowned in silence. And almost at once, another figure came, Penthesilea, the queen of the Amazons, proud, fearless, flanked by a host of warrior women. She came not for plunder, nor for favour, but because she believed. She believed that women too had the right to stand within the circle of the great. She arrived not as a shadow, but as a flame. Even knowing it might end in death, she did not hide behind walls. She did not retreat into a tent. Penthesilea demanded the field. Achilles, hearing of her arrival, once again lifted his spear. Without counsel, without hesitation, he went out to meet her. Their duel was swift, like two torrents colliding into one riverbed. Penthesilea fought with grace and power, with a courage worthy of song. Achilles allowed himself no errors, yet in his heart he acknowledged her, a foe destined to live forever in memory. When at last her body fell, he stooped to remove her helmet, to see the face beneath the bronze, and in that instant a strange silence struck him. The features revealed were young, almost childlike. In her fading gaze he saw not fear, but something close to peace. It was the second time in the war he felt how thinly the thread between life and humanity was stretched. He spoke no words, yet the Greeks who watched understood. The heart of Achilles had cracked once more, though none could see how deeply. From that day he grew more closed, more distant. He ate little, slept less, and avoided councils. He entered battle as if by habit, fulfilling tasks as though each were a sentence pronounced. Even his enemies began to look on him not with hatred but with pity. He was too great, they whispered, to remain among the living. And then, in the thick of battle, as the day waned toward evening, a bow was drawn on the far side of the field. It was Paris, the same man whose choice long ago had sparked this war. He was no celebrated warrior, yet on that day his string drew true. The arrow he loosed was not aimed by strength, nor guided by honour. It sought weakness, and it found it. They say it was Apollo himself who guided the shaft. The arrow flew across the ranks, past clashing shields and ringing steel, and struck the one place untouched by divine protection, the heel, the spot where his mother had once held him, dipping him into the black river of Styx. Achilles did not scream. He did not fall in thunder. He sank slowly, as if a weight he had carried all his life at last claimed its right. In his eyes, as breath still lingered, there was no fear. There was something quieter, perhaps peace, perhaps relief. When the Greeks rushed to him, he still lived. He looked upon them not with plea, not with reproach, but with farewell. And when his eyes closed, the sky darkened, not with storm, but because one of the brightest flames of human strength had gone out. The death of Achilles was not a defeat, it was an ending. Kings, warriors, even enemies felt it. Now everything will be different. With him ended an age, the age when a man could rise almost to the level of the gods, if only he dared to walk his path to the very end. His death shook not only the Greek camp, it reverberated within the walls of Troy itself. The Greeks, who had relied upon him as their unbreakable strength, suddenly found themselves bereft. The Trojans, who'd lost so many sons to his spear, felt no triumph, only a hollow emptiness. Even the gods upon Olympus fell silent, as though acknowledging that what had passed was more than a warrior. It was something greater. His body, still radiant in the armour of Hephaestus, was borne back to camp. There was no wailing, no frantic cries, only silence, long, heavy, unbroken. The only voice was the whisper of wind through the tents, carrying something like a funeral hymn. Thetis rose from the sea once more, not as a goddess, but as a mother. She washed her son's body with water brought from the depths, as though cleansing sorrow itself, sorrow too vast for words. He was buried with the highest honours war could grant. A great mound rose above his grave, tall as the masts of Greek ships, built by the shore so that every sailor who approached would see. Here lies the one who did not retreat when all others faltered, and beside him, as he had wished, they later laid Patroclus, brother not by blood, but by spirit. Their ashes mingled, inseparable even in death. But even in mourning, strife did not end. A new struggle began, not for life, but for memory. The armour of Achilles, forged by the god of fire, became the cause of dispute. Ajax, mighty, straightforward, honourable, claimed it by right of strength. Odysseus, cunning, eloquent, declared that glory should pass to the one whose mind could match the weight of war. The judgment favoured Odysseus, and Ajax, dishonoured, descended into madness and soon into death. Thus the armour of Achilles, meant to carry on his spirit, instead sowed new loss. Yet his legacy did not vanish with bronze. It was carried forward in blood. His son, Neoptolemus, born of Deidamia on the hidden isle of Skyros, came to Troy at the war's end. Younger, sharper, less restrained, he would commit the final act. It was he who struck down King Priam at the altar, the old and wise ruler, in the last flare of terror as Troy collapsed. It was he who took Briseis, once the beloved of Achilles, as his own, but still the name of Achilles did not fade. Blind poets sang of him. Warriors whispered his name before battle, like a charm against fear. Boys lifting their first spear were told his story, the hero who conquered, but did not live to see the conquest. His fate did not end with his body. It continued in every soul who dared to follow his path, knowing few could walk it to the end. He was a man. He was the son of a goddess. He was the hero who chose death over oblivion, a short life over a long shadow. And so his memory became more than remembrance. It became a form of eternal glory, reaching toward every hand that ever trembled between fear and honor.